So, first thing I need to say is we are not copyright lawyers. In fact, I'm not sure if you understand or know this, but we're not lawyers at all. So these are general pieces of advice, and they shouldn't be construed as legal advice. If you need legal advice on copyright, you should contact a copyright attorney, a trademark attorney, intellectual property attorney, basically, and they will be able to give you some really specific, detailed information. Okay, but most of the time, for most people, as authors, for those of us who are authors, we really don't need a lawyer to fill out a copyright for us. Okay, so just kind of one of those things, but I need to make that disclaimer. All right. Let's see. Am I hitting next or are you? Okay. All right. So first off, I don't know if you realize this or not, but our right to our own material, to have our material protected, anything that we create, has been built into the Constitution. And our founding fathers found it so imperative that we have the right to create and be to put works out and to our keep our society moving forward with basically creative works, that they built it right into the Constitution. So as an author, you have the right to make physical or digital copies, to build upon what you've already written. So say you wrote a book and you're going to do a follow-up book, okay? To distribute copies of your work, to publicly perform your work, to display your work, and to publicly perform sound recordings of your work via digital audio transmission. All of this was built into the Constitution to protect you as an author. And it is just an amazing, amazing thing that we have to protect us and our work. Okay, so most of this, I believe, is pretty self-explanatory. To build upon what you've written, say you're writing a series and you have book one and someone else comes out with book two. Well, guess what? You're protected in that scenario. They can't use your characters and go on with the story and recreate what you have written. So that is part of the protection that's built into our Constitution. So your work is your work. And feel free to go ahead. I know this is different. It's a different platform than what we're used to, but feel free to write questions in the comments. So, and if you have questions as we go along, and we will get to them as we move forward. Okay. Okay, so the Berne Convention was held in 1886. One of the only things that a lot of countries agree on, very few, as you know, is copyright law. And 179 countries came together, and the Berne Convention introduced the concept that copyright exists the moment a work is created, rather than requiring registration. So you write a book, and that thing is yours. It is copyrighted the moment that you hit the end, that you're done, that you've written whatever it is you've written, it's copyrighted. So when I hear people talking about I need to copyright something, that's not technically what you're doing. You're technically registering your work. Okay, so there's a difference. You're copyrighted from the moment you create the work, but then you need to register the work with the Library of Congress. So what the Berne Convention did, it brought 179 countries together, and all of these countries recognize one another's copyrights held by citizens of all other parties to the convention. So in France, somebody writes a book and somebody in the UK tries to rip it off, well, the person in France is protected because of the Berne Convention. Okay, so that is how we're protected around the world. Now, not all countries participate in the Berne Convention. So you'll find that there's a handful of countries that did not. And so if someone takes our work from one of those countries, there's not a whole lot we can do about it. All right, but just know that most of those are third world countries, and it's just part of doing business. So you have exclusive rights as an author. Okay, and what that means, and I'm going to back up here just a little bit. But exclusive rights means you are the only one who can do all of this. Okay, so all of these, to make physical, to build upon, to distribute, to publicly perform, to display, or publicly perform sound recordings, they're yours. Those are your exclusive rights. Unless, of course, you hand the rights to someone else. Okay, so your exceptions to exclusive rights are as follows. Statutorily is most common is the fair use. And what fair use is, if those of you who have wondered, so one of the questions I get a lot, and I see a lot in manuscripts, are people wanting to use song lyrics in their books. Well, it's a fine line with song lyrics, okay? So really what fair use was created for, or primarily used, is for like educational materials being used in the classroom. So a teacher can take a book, they can make copies of parts of the book and hand them out to their pupils, and they will not get in trouble for that. So you cannot do anything about that because they're using it to teach, and that's called fair use. So most of the time, those types of fair use books that'll be used are nonfiction, but there are exceptions to that where a fiction book might be used in a fair use. Say it's an English teacher teaching fiction writing or creative writing in the classroom. They might pull some fiction out and use copies. We were working with a client here recently where this is a health book, and they use little excerpts from some of the books, and it was for educational purposes. And so we really studied it a lot, and she came to the conclusion that she was okay using it under the fair use statutorily clause to be able to use someone else's work. And there's some factors in that. Is what is it being used for? How much are you using from the book? You can't copy the whole book and put it in your book. That would never get approved. But so that's fair use. And then of course, contractually. Contractually is if I want to use song lyrics in my book and I send out a request to the person who holds the rights to that song, asking for permissions to use that in my book. I have to have that written approval, permissions in my hand, in my person, in order to use a song lyric. Now, here's the deal. People use song lyrics in their books. I get it, even though and they have them edited. And editors don't point this out for some reason. I don't understand. But song lyrics between the music companies and Disney are basically the two people you don't mess with. Okay, so you don't pull something out of Disney and use it, and you don't use song lyrics because they will come after you with big teeth and they will bite and it will hurt. Okay, so in a lot of other cases, you're able to use fair use. In those two cases, be very, very, very careful. I would just stay away from them. Okay, and that's what I recommend. Anytime I see song lyrics in a book, is just get them out. I have requested permissions for songs, for lyrics, and it's been 7 years, and I still haven't even received a response. So this is something that could really put your book on hold if you're waiting to use song lyrics. Now, one way to get around it is paraphrase. Okay, so like I was using for my book, I was using a worship song. So I just kind of created my own lyrics, or I said, hey, the group, and you can name the group and you can name the title, but you can't use the lyrics. And so just making it a general phrase about, whatever it may be, and talk about the song that did this kind of thing, where you're not actually quoting the lyrics. That's one way to get rid of it, or to protect yourself. So those two things, just be on the lookout for. You don't want to use them. So works created on or after January 1st, 1978 are protected for a term of the life of the author plus 70 years. And so how long your work is protected for. And then you'll also kind of figure out like what is public domain. And public domain are those works that have been created and the author has died and 70 years has passed. And I don't know, I saw a couple different years of like, I don't know, one site said it was anything before 1924 is now public domain, but I would just check it. Just check the dates, and if you want to use something, some song lyrics from 100 years ago, just take a look at the dates and make sure that you've got it in public domain before you use it in your manuscript. Okay. All right. Who should copyright? Well, in my opinion, anyone who creates should copyright. For those of us on this call, we're looking at written works. But other things can be copyrighted. Written, they could be, works of art, music, not only the lyrics, but the melodies. So, I mean, you've got a whole list of things that can be copyrighted. For our purposes here, we're all authors, and that's what we're working on. So, basically, any of us who write, we should register our written works for copyright protections. How do you copyright? Well, first off, yep, Dan is going to come back in for this because he, while I have done it for my own work, Dan is the one who actually, for the authors who choose for us to do it for them, he's the one who actually uploads the documents to Library of Congress. So I'm going to go through a couple of these little things here just in A, and then I'm going to turn it over to him, and then I'll come back to point B. Library of Congress, it's a single contributor. So you have written the book, it's $45 to register that through e-filing. Now, if you have a foreword in your book, that's considered a contributor. So what I do, me personally, just to kind of, get away from having to pay the $65. I mean, it's $20. It's not that big of a deal, but okay. So I'm a little tight sometimes. All right. What I'll do is I'll copyright it without the foreword in there. And then I'll add the foreword in afterward, because the foreword doesn't really need to be copywritten. It's, it's a foreword. So, and then more than one contributor is $65. And that includes if you have an artist doing illustrations, if it's a multi, if it's compilation or something like that. So, and that's for e-filing. And then paper filing, if you want to actually do it old school, it is $125. Okay. Now, here's the thing is you do not have to wait 6 months to get your paper in the mail that your copyright has been registered. Because why? Because it was copywritten legally from the moment you finished it, that you wrote it. Okay. So that thing is protected, and then you registered it. You do not have to wait to get that in the mail to make sure it's protected. It's protected. Okay. Dan is going to show you the actual Library of Congress site now.
Yes, so I'm going to go to it. I believe if you look in the chat, I did just paste in there the URL for the Copyright Office, which is it's copyright.gov, G-O-V. So pretty easy to get to.
There we go. Okay. So we're going to talk about the poor man's copyright, and you're going to hear this a lot. People who have stuck their manuscript in the mail, mailed it to themselves, and put it in a safe place. While that can work, and it certainly has, Willie Nelson, for instance, mailed some songs that he wrote to himself. He had an infringement, and he used that, had him open it in court, and won a lot of money. Okay, so it's certainly a way to do it, but it's $45, you guys. It's $45 to register your copyright. And it's just the safer way to go. So I highly recommend it. Okay. You can do this, but again, it's $45. Copyright your work, or register it, I mean. So, okay. Works for hire. Now this is a little bit of a tricky area for copyright. And this may be what you need to talk to a lawyer for. Okay. So while we were talking about registering your work, we have worked with authors who come to us and say, hey, I already copyrighted my work. I hired the service to do it. They charged me $675 to register my copyright. Well, you just saw that it was $45. Okay. And it is simple. I did it when I first wrote songs all by myself on the computer years ago. If I can figure it out, anyone can figure it out. I'm not, being truthful here. So for that part, registering your copyright, you really don't need a lawyer. You don't need a service. You really don't even need Dan and I to do it for you. We don't charge all that much, but it still takes time to do it. You can do this part yourself and save money. Okay, now work for hire is, say you are hiring a contractor or you have an employee who's working for you. So works for hire are another animal. And um, in order to register your work as a sole creator, so as one author, and say you've hired someone to do your artwork for you, okay, or that the you know create a cover that was created, that was an artist did for you, so they actually painted or did some kind of media to get the artwork done, and or a photographer, that kind of thing. In order to be able to register that under your own name, first off, you have to have a written contract with that contractor stating that this is a work for hire. Absolutely a must. Now, what happens if you don't? Okay. While you're small, probably nothing. But what happens if Jana's book, The Grandest Gorgonzola, goes viral and people love this book, and she gets contacted from the Cartoon Network and they're like, hey, we want to make a show based on your books. And so it gets going and it's great. And the artist sees it and says, hey, I did that artwork. And if there's not an agreement in place ahead of time, they can come back and take a very, very large chunk of what you're getting and sue you because there was no agreement in place. So if you are hiring someone, make sure that you get an agreement. So like all the work we do, we are work for hire. We do not own any part of your book. We do not take credit for your book. We don't even act as a publisher for your book. We help you publish your own work. So, but this is one area that you need to protect yourself in. And then the other thing for work for hire is it has to be part of a collaboration. There's a few different things, but for authors, it needs to a collaboration. So you and your artist and the person who writes a forward, or it just needs, there's a couple criteria to make that work, and it can be sticky. So all of Disney's artists are all work for hire. They do not have any rights on anything that they create for Disney. Okay, but in other situations, authors do and artists do, simply because they didn't have that criteria met, the contract in place and the collaboration and that kind of thing. So this is an area that you're going to want to talk to a lawyer about, possibly. Okay, so just be wary of that. If you are traditionally publishing your book, who owns the rights to your manuscript, you or the publisher? A lot of times, many, many, many times, when you sign on that dotted line, you are handing over that entire list in the beginning, that those exclusive rights to your publisher. They now own your book. They have agreed to pay you a small portion, 15% of the net or whatever it is, but it is very, very little compared to what they're making on your book. And I know that, before ebooks were big, when they first started becoming big, authors had to fight to be paid for that, because in most cases, the publisher claimed all other rights to that book. And since ebooks were not expressly written in the contractual portion for the author, the publishers took everything from those ebooks, and authors were fighting left and right. So if you have signed a contract with a traditional publisher, look very carefully at that contract. And if you're about to, really look it over well. Make sure you get a lawyer to look at that contract and spell every little bit out to you, because you can go back and you can bargain back and forth and go back and forth with the publisher until you get the contract you want. So you do not have to just accept what they hand you. So if you're looking at a traditional publisher, be very, very leery. I was chatting with a gal actually here in Oklahoma City. She's with a traditional publisher. She writes Christian fiction. And when she first got signed, with Bethany House, I'm going to name them because this happened. They just kind of slipped in the contract that she would have no international rights, none. Her book sold like crazy in Europe. She did not get a dime for it, not a dime. Talk about a bummer, right? So it doesn't matter if they call themselves a Christian publisher, if they're a traditional publisher, whatever they call themselves. Just make sure you're looking at that contract very well and have a lawyer look at that with you. Okay, so say you get your book, you're done, it's just published, and you register your copyright. Then you find that someone has infringed upon that copyright, and it's someone within those 179 countries. So they're in one of those countries where the infringement has taken place. So there's what's called a 90-day rule. If you register your book within 90 days of publication, you will be awarded statutory damages, and the infringee will have to pay all your attorney's fees, just like that. And it's up to, I might have this in the notes here in a minute, but it's up to $150,000 that you can be awarded if someone, for each work. So if it's more than one, for each work, you can be awarded up to $150,000 for the infringement. Now, this is only if you have registered your work within the first 90 days of publication. You can still register it later, and you can still win later, a lawsuit, but it won't be an automatic award of statutory damages and the attorney fees. So you'll have to fight for whatever it is you get. It can still be a lot, but with the 90-day rule, you don't have to do anything but say, hey, they just used my stuff, and the courts will award you statutory damages. Okay, so that's a really big plus of copyrighting your work within 90 days of publication. Then the person who infringed, so they can have up to $150,000 fine for each work that they have infringed. They pay all the court and attorney fees if they're within that 90-day period, the 90-day rule. They have, of course, an injunction issued to stop. The illegal work could be impounded, and they could face jail time for the infringement. All right, then liability. So I want to talk about this for just a few minutes. One of the things that I hear quite often from authors who come to me with some just heart-wrenching stories, of abuse or, spousal abuse or, child sexual abuse, all kinds of things like this. And they're like, well, can I get sued if I name them? If I name the perpetrator, can I be sued? Well, yeah, you could. You could be sued. Let's face it. People sue over anything these days. It doesn't matter. But here's the thing. When the story is true and when it has happened to you personally, the amount of cases where a perpetrator suing the person sharing their story, that of them winning, the perpetrator winning, is minute. It's minute. The Constitution and our exclusive rights was created to protect us, the creators of the work. And in almost every single case, when you are stating something true that happened to you, you're okay. Okay. Now, if you're still kind of leery and you're like, geesh, do I really want to go through all that and possibly, turn family members around? Well, first off, let's face it, too many people get away with too much crap these days. And, calling people on the carpet, I don't think is such a bad thing. But that's just my opinion. So, hey, everyone's got their own. And so, but you can get liability insurance. And for authors, for this very purpose. If you're part of the Authors Guild, they have a plan. I mean, you can Google it, you can look it up, but you can actually purchase liability insurance to protect you against a lawsuit. If you're wanting to name the the person who's done these things.